In the last lesson, we learned all about the model view controller design pattern. And in this lesson, we're going to apply the theory that we learned to our quiz app. First, we're going to separate out the part of our code that deals with the quiz data, namely this quiz array and our question struct. Go ahead and right-click on that question.swift file and select New Group from Selection. This is going to create a folder that contains that question.swift file, and we're going to rename that folder Model. Next, we're going to do the same thing for our main.storyboard. So we're going to create a new group, and we're going to call this one the view. Finally, we're going to right-click on the view controller.swift and create a new group called controller. So if you're OCD like me, feel free to drag the folder around so that they are in the right order. And now that we've set out our MVC structure, the next step is to actually do the work of converting our code into the MVC design pattern. In order to do that, we need to split up our view controller.swift. The controller should really only be responsible for telling the other components what to do and respond to changes in other components. This means that the view controller.swift should handle what to do with the user interaction from the view and tell the view what it should display. It should also fetch the relevant data from the model to send to the screen and tell the model to update itself. But at the moment, our view controller is handling all of the quiz data as well as all of the quiz logic. So we first have to separate this part out. Go ahead and right-click on the model folder, create a new Swift file in there that we'll call the quiz brain. This is going to be the brain of our quiz, and it's going to handle all of the logic. In here, we're going to create a new structure called quiz brain. And the first thing that I'm going to add to this quiz brain is my quiz array here that's currently living inside view controller.swift. So I'm going to cut it out and put it into my quiz brain. And with a little bit of reformatting, we should now have our quiz as a property of our quiz brain. Now, we don't need to initialize this quiz property because we've already given it the value that it needs, and it's never going to change because it's a constant. And we're also not going to be adding questions or removing questions in the middle of running our app. Next, we're going to move the question number variable over to the quiz brain as well, because the quiz brain is now going to be the one that's tracking these sort of things to do with the quiz. Now, at this point, if you take a look inside your view controller, you'll notice that pretty much all hell has broken loose out here. And there will be errors left, right, and center. You might have doubts about whether if you should have started this endeavor at all, but fear not, I'm here, and the result will be worth it, I promise. If we examine our answer pressed function, you can see that it's actually currently fulfilling two roles. One is the answer checking part, and two is the quiz progression, so going to the next question. Now let's create a new instance or new copy of our quiz brain at the top of our view controller. So just below our IB outlets, we're going to create a new variable called quiz brain. And of course, the copies of our structs need to be lowercase to begin with. And we're going to create that from our quiz brain structure. So quiz brain in capitals, and then a set of parentheses at the end. And you might need to just hit Command B every so often for it to recognize what you're talking about. Now we can use our quiz brain inside our view controller.swift. So next we're going to move our answer checking logic out of our view controller.swift and make our quiz brain handle it instead. To do that, we'll need a function inside our quiz brain. Now, whenever a function is associated with a structure or a class, basically some sort of custom type, well then usually we call it a method. But this is just something that's quite pedantic. In reality, if you hear functional method, they essentially refer to the same thing, a package of instructions wrapped inside a name. So inside the curly braces of my structure, QuizBrain, I'm going to create my method, which is going to be called checkAnswer. And this method is going to need an input in order to work. So the input is going to be the answer that the user chose, and this is going to be a string. Next, we can go into our view controller and delete this line of code. Instead, we're going to move that functionality to our QuizBrain. We're going to call QuizBrain.checkAnswer, and then we should be able to add the parameter, which is user answer, and the argument that we're going to pass in, or the value, is of course going to be this one. So it's going to be user answer. Now, if you think this is a little bit excessive in terms of the naming of our method, check answer, user answer, then one way of making this a little bit shorter is actually to add an external parameter name. So remember that the parameter name refers to the name of the input that comes into the function. So we can have an internal and an external parameter name in Swift. So for example, if I decided to call the external parameter name answer, then I would be able to use answer here as the external parameter name. Meanwhile, inside the function, I can use the internal parameter name, which is that user answer right here. Now, what we can also do is we could also simply say that there shouldn't be an external parameter name. And to do that, we simply replace the external parameter name, so the first part, with an underscore. And now, inside our view controller, we can simply write checkAnswer and pass in this as the argument. So remember, the argument is the value that gets passed in as the input. The parameter is the name of the input. And we now have an external and an internal parameter name. We use the internal parameter name inside the function. The external parameter name is used when we call the function. And in this case, because we turned it into an underscore, it no longer needs an external parameter name. And our method now reads a lot better in English. Check answer, which answer to check? Well, the user's answer, of course, which comes from here. Now, at this point, we get an error that tells us that this user answer is actually an optional string. But check answer is, of course, expecting an actual string. So in our case, because we only have two buttons that are linked to this IB action, and they both definitely have a title, we can be fairly confident in force unwrapping this current title. And that turns our user answer into a actual string data type. So now let's go back to our QuizBrain and check the user answer that was passed in against the actual answer. So let's add our if statement here, check to see if the user answer is equal to the quiz at the current question number dot answer. Well, then in that case, they got it right. So user got it right. But otherwise, then the user probably got it wrong. So now, while we're in the process of implementing the MVC design pattern, we're coming up against a roadblock. Our problem is that the answer checking happens in our QuizBrain, but it's our view controller that's responsible for updating the UI, changing the sender's background color to green or to red. How can we get the result of this check answer method out from the QuizBrain and send it over here into the view controller? Well, if you can solve this problem, you might already know how to use Swift functions that have outputs. But if you don't know how to solve this, then head over to the next Swift deep dive, where we talk about the third type of functions, functions that can have outputs.